That was not captured on camera. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this adult forum on coffee and Christian identity. We'll begin with a prayer, and then I'll introduce to you our special, knowledgeable coffee guest, Neil Balcom. So let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, so draw our hearts to Thee, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills, that we may be wholly Thine, utterly dedicated unto Thee. And then use us, we pray Thee, as Thou wilt, and always to Thy glory, and the welfare of Thy people, through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So we begin today with introducing ourselves, Elise Vigiano and Neil Balcom, and I'll let Neil introduce himself in a second. But I will tell you our origin story of Neil and Elise and our coffee love. So I was going to seminary at VTS, and you were taking an evening class.
I was.
Yeah. And we didn't technically know each other, but everybody in the seminary world knew that I was obsessed with coffee. And somebody knew Neil and said, "You've got Elise. You've got to talk to Neil. Neil, you've got to talk to Elise." And now we're sitting here today talking to each other, 7 years later. Which that's insane that I can say that, but. But our dedication, our friendship, really became more entwined when I started the coffee shop at VTS called the Flamingo. And because I knew Neil and he was a part of the Alexandria community, when I was picking a coffee for the coffee shop, there was no choice. It was always going to be Swings, and it was always going to be Neil. So that's how we started this friendship, and I'll let you introduce yourself in terms of Swings. And then we'll get on with the morality and the ethics of coffee.
Thanks for having me. I am the director of coffee for Swings Coffee, which is located just in the Delray neighborhood. But we've been around for 105 years. And we have 2 cafes flanking each side of the White House. And we've moved a little bit over the years. Started out on E Street, right kind of catty corner, next to the E Street Theater, catty corner of the FBI. The facade exists in this historic Pennsylvania Avenue corridor where if that facade had been there for X amount of years, you can't change it. So it's a T-Mobile now, but it still says Swings Coffee. And on the second and third floors, it's been incorporated into a larger law firm kind of complex of buildings. So, but I came to Alexandria 9 years ago, almost to the day, from Chicago. And had been importing in Chicago, importing coffee, working specifically in Uganda first, and Burundi, as well as Mexico. And I'll kind of get back to that in a second, but kind of I had no church home in Chicago at all. I was there for 5 years, and before that, 11 years in another town in Illinois. And I came here, and I was in a season of my life that I just really needed something. I needed that. And so I started shopping around. Our roast master at the time was a devout Catholic, so he was taking these Catholic churches, and but it was almost like every Sunday I would go to multiple services at different churches. Just maybe it was the Old Town Presbyterian, like the meeting house or something like that. so I was still kind of in this search for a church home when Ross Kane came into the cafe, which is the cafe and the roastery and our offices are all in one building, kind of under the same roof. And Ross was wearing his clericals minus the collar, and had his collar like stuck in his shirt. And one of the baristas said,
Highly inappropriate, but okay.
"We're not speaking ill of Ross."
Yeah, sorry. We love Ross. We love Ross. He loves coffee.
And one of the baristas, who's a good friend of mine, said, "Are you a priest?" And he was like, "Yeah, yeah." And so Clark, the barista, said, "Well, you're a priest at a church. You drink coffee, So you should serve our coffee at your church." And Ross was like, "That's not a bad idea, I guess," and kind of took it back to Oren. And then it wasn't a long time after that Ross, Oren, and I think a couple of other people on staff came into our lab for what's called a coffee cupping, and that's a standardized way of tasting coffee and making sure the quality's there and like really assessing kind of the notes and things that are going on in coffee, good or bad. But for our purposes, it was like, let's find a coffee for St. Paul's. So then I showed up at St. Paul's and decided this was home. The search was over. So.
Which for that I'm so grateful.
That's
because
my origin story.
Then we get to this place together, which is amazing. So also the coffee you're tasting today is Swings. It's going to get better soon. We're improving all of the machines and stuff. It's time for an update. So just know, coffee, if that's bringing you to church, it's going to get better. Well, that was the origin story of the two of us and how we got to these places. Tell me about the origin story of sort of coffee / wherever you want to start with the logistics and, how does it even get to our cup in the first place? So wherever you want to begin with.
Yeah, so coffee was discovered. Its actual origin story is not documented in any way. It is, but the thought is that the idea was that coffee was discovered in Ethiopia, and there's the myth, which could be true, goes something like there was a herder named Kaldi, and Kaldi had goats. And he found his goats nibbling on these berries while they were roaming the forest, and he noticed that they were pretty jacked up. And he thought, well, I got to try this. So
that's what I look like in the office. You should ask Lauren.
Yeah. So that's someone decided to extract. So it's a tropical fruit, but extract the seed from the fruit and then roast it over fire and then brew it like a tea. So that's kind of where it came from. There's kind of an original sin in coffee, and that the way it kind of spread out from that area and that region was really kind of made its way to Europe and to the world writ large through pathways of the Crusades. And of course the Crusades were, to put it simplistically, like this effort to quash infidels and kind of retake Jerusalem, right? So, but it kind of inadvertently set up trade routes as well. So that's how we see coffee going from basically forests in Yemen or Ethiopia into cafes in Austria, Belgium, etc., London. Yeah.
And in terms of the coffee shop itself, so I did a paper in seminary on the origins of the coffee shop, and sort of along the same lines, a very wealthy trader gentleman was traveling, went and discovered coffee while he was on his travels, came back to London, England, and had his indentured servant. And it was an indentured servant because this person was paid. Not paid a lot, mind you, and had him discover, how do you make coffee for a group of people? So, the routine, or what was happening at the time, were tea. People would come over for tea and just sort of casually gather. There were already pubs and tea houses, and so this guy from his sort of living room, which is also how the Flamingo came to be, from the kitchen in one of the dorms, started gathering around coffee, and people said, "This is great stuff. Like, let's sell this." So actually, the indentured servant was, through the wealthy tradesman, was able to get a stall in a church courtyard, because that's where all business was being done. That's where the marketplace was. And so got a stall in a church yard and started selling coffee out of that. And sort of the dark side to all of that is, this indentured servant isn't known. There is a name somewhere of him, but all of this started on his labor that he wasn't paid very much for, and it's still sort of true today. Baristas, depending on who you work for, aren't, Starbucks has done a great job in terms of paying and offering benefits, but if you're working in a little coffee house, it's hard to be paid a livable wage. So just naming that. And so in terms of dark side, did you have anything else? I'm looking at our notes here. What you experience today when you're going and you're visiting farms? What does that look like when you're looking and picking coffee before it gets to the cup, before it gets to a cafe?
It looks very exotic, right? Because you're traveling to Costa Rica or Guatemala or Uganda, and a lot of my coworkers get jealous that I get to take trips. But it's, you're up at 6 a.m. and you're in bed at midnight, kind of thing. It's constant meetings, it's constant travel, but you're in a beautiful place. I guess when my eyes started to get open was when I was in Chicago doing importing. I went to Uganda back in the early 2000s, 2008, and it's just Uganda was not on the map there at all. Mm-hmm. You can find it now. If you just Google it, you can find different roasters, coffee companies, importers selling coffee from Uganda, but their access to market was nil. Mm-hmm. Just didn't exist. So a lot of what they were doing, especially where I was working on Mount Elgon, Mount Elgon is bisected by the border with Kenya. And so what a lot of people were doing, because they had no access to the European or American markets, is they were just taking it over the border to Kenya and selling it as Kenya coffee. Still getting basically nothing for their efforts. But they had to find a market. Mm-hmm. And there was no internal market because frankly, coffee, tea, wine, these are all kind of luxury products. This is a controversial thing that I say, but nobody needs coffee.
I don't know what he's
Nobody
talking
needs it. Yeah.
I need it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, especially when you're working within kind of a depressed economy that has been that way under a semi-dictator for generations, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel is, it's just not there.
Right.
So, us 4 white people went into Uganda and we're like, hey, we've got some ideas. And but knowing that dynamic, we kind of stayed in our lane and in our place, just kind of as buyers, and we basically said, we have a proposition for you farmers. This is 10,000 farmers on the side of a mountain. And we were dealing with several community groups on the mountain. And it's like, basically, if you can improve quality, then you will also improve the price of the coffee. And they were just kind of skeptical. This was like, well, we've been doing this the same way. This is how my father did it, his father did it, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So it took a little time to get to a place where there was trust, mm-hmm. Which is totally understandable. So once we were able to improve quality, we improved price, we put premiums, we started doing things like building schools in local communities and giving people community centers and installing, looking after food security and also sanitation, funding different projects, partnering with USAID to help in whatever the community needed. It's not my job to go in there and say, you need this. It's for them to tell us what they need, what their community needs, how their lives can be improved. So that was my first glimpse at this is not fun and exotic. It's hard work. There are kids working. As you're going up the mountain, at the lower elevations, you'll just see a truck kind of comes by and will dump a boulder in somebody's little parcel of land, and then the whole family takes hammers and they make gravel, and that's their job. That's how they get paid. So you have 4-year-olds, you have 8-year-olds, mm-hmm. Everybody. And yeah. So you see utter destitution, and it can't not affect you.
Right.
This is kind of where my Christian ethic or Christian identity kind of comes into play here. By the way, coffee and Christian identity, it could be anything in Christian identity, right? I mean, it could be accounting and Christian identity, right? It's how you infuse your life with loving your neighbor and loving God. There's a very special kind of framework for me within coffee that I know that I can make things better for my neighbor. Right. I'll say it's not charity, but it is charity. It's Christian charity, but it's not, here's some money. It's working through business channels to improve someone's life, mm-hmm. to improve the quality of the product, to make it sustainable, long-term. And that's kind of what we've tried to do at Swings, is create this program called Homegrown, because we're dealing with small family gardens for the most part. We have a couple that are a little bit larger, but they're still family run. And you have family kind of working on the farms, and that is where you make the most difference versus, say, a multinational corporation that owns a farm in Costa Rica or Guatemala. So that's kind of elevator pitch, I guess.
I was going to say, what's the difference between, so, you know, I don't mind paying a lot for coffee because I know that whole backstory. Whereas, you know, you could get Folgers coffee for, I don't know, $2 from the dollar store, you know. So what's the difference? One, you just described already, there's a major difference between a Swings beans than Folgers coffee beans. What's happening with something like Folgers when we keep buying something like that?
Well, you see these mass producers, Folgers, Maxwell House, Starbucks, Pete's, you know, and they exist in a spectrum, within a larger spectrum of quality, of price. But when you see kind of people, when you see kind of we exist in something called third wave coffee. We may be on the fourth wave at this point, but third wave, first wave is just coffee at home. Second wave is coffee at a diner or a restaurant. Third wave is coffee in a specialty coffee shop. You know, so we would put Misha's and you know other locals into that category as well. But the third wave is specialty coffee. Specialty coffee is a higher grade. There's a ranking system or a grading system that kind of puts things into specialty or commodity. And you can look across the food chain and see that there are a lot of products that exist in a similar manner of like, well, this is the really nice stuff, and can be sold on the open market. You just look at your choices for spaghetti sauce. You know, you can get something out of a can, and you know it's probably not the best tomatoes that were grown, or you can kind of look further up the shelf and go for something a little more special. But I think that when the specialty coffee community has more flexibility, and that we can say, no, we're doing this. We're doing homegrown coffee. We're doing this, and you know, we have these certain standards. And when enough of us do it as a group, the kind of bigger houses start to follow. So I don't know that, you know, over the 10, 15 years, you've seen that Starbucks was just black as night. I mean, just burned. And that's how we kind of got raised on Starbucks in the 90s. But then the specialty coffee community kind of went a different way as it grew up and said, no, we're not going to burn the coffee because there's so much good stuff in there that as soon as you burn it, it's going out the chimney. All the good stuff's going out the chimney. Why would I do that? So you see Starbucks saying, oh, okay, well, Pike Place. Oh, okay, well, Blonde. You know, oh, they're paying, you know, $13 an hour, $14 an hour. You see the behemoths kind of come along. Folgers has the specialty line now. So it takes a little bit of time, but you're bringing the whole business to a more progressive view, because you're changing the buying habits and the thoughts of consumers at large, to say like, wait, don't drink the burnt stuff. Try this Ethiopian coffee. I swear to God, it tastes like blueberries.
It does. It's true. It's true. So back to I love this because when Neil and I were discussing this talk today, we were talking about, you know, how is it that we've shaped, you know, you're a Christian and a coffee roaster, and I said there's got to be something different about how you're working in the world with other people, building these relationships that stems from a Christ-centeredness. And even though Swings is not, it is by no means a Christian organization, you're doing your part to change the hearts and minds of people around you, to see love, see Christ in them, because you're treating them with dignity and respect. And then not only that, but then trying to also improve their lives. And so I guess in terms of the coffee house, whenever I don't know when did you figure that out? When did you was there a moment that you were like, okay, I'm gonna use what I know as a Christian, or is it more subtle that you're like, this is how I'm gonna work in the world?
It was never deliberate. I can kind of look back in retrospect, or even in real time, and just like, I'm entering a business and someone's behind me, I'm going to hold the door open for them. It's like, right? Like, you just do these kind of the small things throughout the day as many times as you can, because it's the right thing to do, it's the charitable thing to do, and we seek to serve God in any way that we can. So there are plenty of times I don't do that.
Right. Not often, just so we know, Neil. Not often.
But yeah, it was. There was never just like a aha moment where I put everything together.
Mm-hmm.
It was more, this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had already kind of been doing this in Chicago, and I came here and I said, and just the more that you get into it, the more that you're at Origin, the more that you're meeting these people who are living on $1.80 a day, they exist in a kind of agricultural pastoral setting, right, in some of the poorest countries on earth. So you have this dichotomy of some of the poorest people working in one of the poorest sectors in their industry within their country. We're not talking about the tech sector in Managua.
Right.
We're talking about a farm in rural Nicaragua, right? And then on the other side of that, it's this huge swing to who drinks coffee. The richest countries on the earth, and the people with extra income, that say, yeah, I'll have this like kind of luxury item every day, throughout the day, I'll have it. So there's a massive, massive expanse between who produces and who consumes.
Right.
And so for me, there are rights and responsibilities built in, right? And it's more responsibility, and really for the producer, it's more rights. That's where the emphasis should be, because it's lopsided, right? So when we're trading coffee, just as soon as you start working in coffee, really going there, understanding the needs and understanding the problems and challenges, it doesn't get better, it gets worse. You're seeing domestic violence, you're seeing food security issues, kids going hungry, not being able to go to school because they can't afford it, or they need to be working on a farm. They're more important as members of labor than they are as students, right? And so you just see these issues. Doesn't matter whether it's in Central America or East Africa, it's the same issues. They're poverty issues. It's the same across the board with slight nuances, right? So when your eyes open to something like that, I feel like it's a responsibility to address it, right? And so when we created Homegrown, it was, and the owner at Swings has been very generous with me and just saying, yeah, go make it, we have certain tenets. We aim to seek out and foster long-term relationships That means the producer knows that they have a customer in us, and we know that we get the best of their crop from them. And we're going to build on this year over year over year over year. So a lot of companies will be like, I just want your best like 5% or your best 1% of your crop, you know, and that's great, you know, except the farmer has 99% or 90% of their crop that they still have to sell. Sometimes they have to sell it internally for nothing at a loss. And so, you know, you need to take a holistic approach to buying and saying, like, we have uses for this grade of coffee and this grade of coffee and this grade of coffee, and these are going to be our Cadillacs, right? And this is the stuff we're going to roast a little bit darker because, you know, it doesn't have as much nuance and complexity in it. We're going to pay more than the market says that we have to, because coffee is on the soft market. So just like oil or any kind of grain, it fluctuates throughout the day, every day. Even after the market's closed, they have pre-market and post-market markets that I don't really understand, but they're not trading, but they're trading. You have speculators that are throwing a wrench into the market currently. So it's a lot of stuff going on. So we just want to implement good policies and make them static. And where we find variables, we're going to try and make them static so that everyone's livelihood is safe and secure and sustainable.
Love it.
I don't even know what question you asked me.
I was just so entranced. I'm like, this is great. I love it. And I would say so Christian identity, so it was basically, I asked, when did you start that? And so you did answer the question, and it was lovely and great. I was enjoying it. And I would say, in terms of the coffee house, coffee shop, for me, there's two parts of this story that I still am sorting out today in terms of my how I'm a priest in the world. And before I decided to even become a priest, I was running a coffee shop at John Carroll University, and the things looked like I was going to definitely be opening up a coffee shop. I had this crazy chocolate chip cookie recipe, and people were all about it, and I knew that I loved working with people. So I was discerning, okay, what is it that I want to do with my life? And I had planted priests in my earlier years than where I'm now, said, you know, you should really consider the priesthood. But I really loved working in this coffee shop. And I had this moment of, what is it that I want to give my life to? And yes, I loved coffee and I loved working with coffee, but I didn't want to be the next Starbucks. Like, I didn't want to figure out the more efficient, the more effective, the most way to earn a dollar off of a cup of coffee. And what I realized was that what I really liked about the coffee shop was the people. I loved touching each life, and coffee was really the conduit to start a conversation, to start learning about people's lives. And at that point, I was like, oh, this is the priesthood that people were telling me about. And then I started down this path where I am today. And then coming to seminary and starting the Flamingo on the seminary campus, the coffee shop there, my management style was influenced by how does one basically do the best in managing people, but not being a real tyrant about it, and basically behind the bar, what I said to all the folks that I hired was, look, I want us to function as the body of Christ. which I thought it was really clever, being in seminary and saying that. I said, look, I'm not going to agree with all the things that you say, and you're not going to agree with all the things that I say. At the end of the day, our focus is loving the person that is in front of you, and yes, that's also your fellow students, that's also their spouses or partners, whoever else is living on campus. And you need to, yes, make them a good cup of coffee, but you need to make them feel seen. And so that, and then in terms of managing folks, it was, we've got to function well together because people are looking at us to be the example to how it's going to work out in the world. So if we're fighting behind the bar for the coffee bar and over something ridiculous, and and we can't still hug it out at the end, then we're in trouble. And then I was like, and then the seminary at large is in trouble. Then the world's in trouble. And so I didn't go off on that tangent too often, but it was important for the ethos of the space behind the bar for the baristas to all understand that. And so again, like you said earlier, our Christian identity does not have to be whatever, it doesn't have to be a particular thing. We just live it out as we feel that it is right and good to live out. And if our eyes are open to that grace and that understanding and seeing God wherever you are and whatever you're doing, there will be change. The change that we've seen, you've seen in the coffee world can be just in any sector of the world as well. Sorry, got a little preachy there. I guess, do you have any final, I'm just noticing our time, any final thoughts, and then we could probably take one or two questions.
Yeah, so I frequently say, when I'm talking about the subject of traceability and purchasing, I bought this off Amazon. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where the fabric came from, where it was harvested, where the dye came from, who sewed it, what sewed it. I don't know any of that, and I can't know any of that. But I can know where my honey comes from. Mm-hmm. I can know where my tea comes from. I can shop at places like 10,000 Villages or, Whole Foods and just kind of being a responsible consumer. Mm-hmm. Consumer has, for better or worse, that's our American identity is bundled up with that. But I think that we can exist in a way to where we are always trying to be responsible in that matter. So it's not that I'm living off the grid and making
Thanks be to God. Yeah.
Weaving my own clothes or anything like that, but it's just being aware and being cognizant, and it's a process, right? It has no ending, but it's I guess act where you can,
right?
And where you can't, pray for those who, mm-hmm. Just as we thank God for the hands that prepare the meal that we have before us, we can do the same for the garments, for the
right.
The people that work in the oil industry and fuel our cars, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I would encourage everyone to be curious. Everyone has one of these, right? But these can't be made without certain minerals that exist deep in the heart of the Congo,
right.
that need to be mined. So it's just not to make you feel bad, but just to be aware of what are the realities of the products that we buy in the world, and if we can make a difference, how do we make a difference?
It's what's just coming to mind is that if you are a living being, you're conscious. You exist. You know that things are around you, and how could you not want to connect if you're aware of all of whatever it is that you're doing? So if we're conscious and made in the image of God, I think we're living and loving in that way. And so I do believe it just comes out of us, and that's, exactly what you said. Whether it's this coat or this phone, we can do better, or we can do better to support and love those that are a part of our lives, even though we don't always know it or see it. So.
And sometimes we can't do that.
Right. Right.
That is what it is. But,
right.
Yeah.
So we have time for, I think, one question. Oh, Barbara Border. That was fast.
Neil, I know you sell cups of coffee, but can we come buy like bags of ground coffee at
Sure.
Swings?
Sure.
Thank you.
Perfect. Let's end on that note. Neil,
This
just
is
so
not a sales pitch.
yeah. I do not get a commission by doing this listings, just so we also know. But just, Neil, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your story, your love of God and coffee, and being a part of this place, St. Paul's.
Well, thanks for having me.